And welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories. This episode is going to be an introduction to, we're going to do a three-part trilogy on the Steelers 2005 season, which will end with a spoiler alert Super Bowl. And this is probably, well, I'm just going to say it. This is my favorite Steelers season of all time. So that's why I felt the need to do three different podcasts on it. I really like this season. It was really like the reward for being a Steelers fan for a long time and not having a lot of success. I mean, not having the ultimate success. Let me say that because they did. It wasn't like being like the Pirates or Pitt or even like a Cleveland Browns or Arizona Cardinals experience. But so it had been a while since the Steelers had won a Super Bowl. Um, they had had a pretty good run with Bill Cowher, and as usual, I forgot to answer Tim. Tim is still with us. Tim is here. He hasn't. He's hanging out.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah,
And yeah, Steve, I'll just add that, I totally agree. It's such a special season and um, one that like people our age, people that were born in the 70s, but were like babies when the 70s teams were going, we waited our whole lives for this season, like literally our whole lives as Steeler fans for this season. So
absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, the Steelers have been perennial playoff contenders for most of the '90s and 2000s. There was a couple seasons in the late '90s and like what 2002, 2003. They had taken a couple playoffs off. They had not won a Super Bowl since Super Bowl 14 over the Rams at the end of the 1979 season. Technically, that Super Bowl was won in like what January of 1980. So, I mean, I was 4 years old when that happened. I don't
yeah,
remember. I don't remember that at all.
yeah, I was about the same age, and you're right. I honestly the first Steeler season I remember would have been like 83-ish, 82, 83. Um and I was still pretty young, but I don't have any memories of the 70s teams.
Yeah, my dad was not a Steelers fan, and my mom really wasn't. Like she's gotten more into sports since she retired, but back then she really wasn't that big of a sports person. Yeah, so yeah, we really weren't into like the Steelers at all. The Pirates for sure, but not the Steelers. Bill Cowher had been hired in '92. He'd been with them since then, but he had not won a Super Bowl. He had had a lot of success in the regular seasons and then made the playoffs a lot, but just not a lot of success in the playoffs. A lot of losses at home in the playoffs. So then in 2004, the Steelers drafted quarterback Ben Roethlisberger with the 11th pick in the draft, and that kind of starts the run of things really going their way. When it's amazing once you have that quarterback position figured out, how everything else starts to fall into place. The Steelers had completely rebuilt the defensive secondary, which had been the other biggest problem on their defense. Like they had a good front seven, but their secondary really stunk from like 2002 to 2003. So they had drafted Chris Hope, and then Paul Amalo in 2003, and what was Paul Amalo? They traded up to get him with the 16th pick. They had drafted Ike Taylor in the fourth round, which actually was funny. Was Mark Madden at the time called that one of the worst draft picks in team history. So I guess Ike got the last laugh on that one. 2003, they still have veteran Deshae Townsend. He had been drafted in like 98, so he'd been around. But then that season in 2005, they drafted another defensive back, Brian McFadden, and he would end up playing a very critical role that season. But the big pickup in the offseason coming into 2005 was tight end Heath Miller, and he would had a great career, had a lot of catches, and years of Heath chants being yelled at Heinz and it
Yes.
still happened. Remember, it still happened after they got rid of like other guys who catch the ball that just looked like a tight end, and people would yell Heath. So
Yeah, big white tight end. It just eef.
yeah, they don't say Ebron for Eric Ebron. Nobody's been at the games this year, so um, Mark Whipple, actually, ironically enough, is the quarterback coach, and Bruce Arians was the wide receiver coach. Both those guys would go on to be head coaches. Whipple would be in college. He's actually now the offensive coordinator at Pitt. Bruce Arians ended up being a pretty good, head coach with Indianapolis and Arizona, and now he's with Tampa Bay. The Steelers the year before had went 15-1. We covered that in another podcast. And which was a great season, but they had lost in the AFC Championship game to the Patriots, which was I think we went over this one of our other podcasts. Is that was such a devastating loss, like top five, like outside of the some of the Pit losses and Penguins loss. That's probably the worst Steelers loss I could remember, because I just seemed like you're 15-1 and you just can't get over the hump.
And they
And
they
that
had beaten New England at home that year too. Like
and
back
Philadelphia, the team that was in the Super Bowl, ended up
right,
being in the Super Bowl. So
right. They had beaten them already, but then New England blew them out in the championship game. It hurt.
yeah, and all Pennsylvania Super Bowl, that would have been weird. But in the off season, Jerome Bettis, who had been with the team since 97, 96,
6.
yeah, 96, um, almost retired. So, and he was a very beloved just in the city and with the team, his teammates, especially. Everybody really liked we talked about before how everybody hated Barry Bonds. Well, everybody seems to love Jerome Bettis. So he's the anti Barry Bonds. Hines Ward had a very emotional interview about Jerome Bettis retiring. He actually cried on like camera during an interview, which like it's funny to think about it now. Like you see men do that like more easily, but I think back then it wasn't as positively viewed, you know?
Mm, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird how that, because we in the Cordell Stewart podcast, we had talked about how that really changed the perception of Cordell Stewart, but it was that was more of like a woe is me. This was like he was really upset for his teammate and that they wouldn't get to have a Super Bowl trophy for his teammate. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was a
I
different
think
kind
it
of
was.
emotion.
Yeah, I think it was more like you said, acceptable. Not that people showing emotion shouldn't always be acceptable, but yeah, Cordell, it was kind of like he was crying because he got benched, and Hines was just wanted to see his friend and his teammate win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. So Bettis thinks about retiring, but then he changes his mind. If you ever watch the Super Bowl DVD, like they have a shot of like I think I remember that game. Like Jerome Bettis had to turn around and come back on the field. Like they ended up getting the ball back real quick, and it was like funny how that just played into their little montage. But mainly he said because the team was still really good. They were still went 15-1 the year before and really hadn't lost anybody, and they were playing in his hometown of Detroit. And he wanted to take one more shot at winning that Super Bowl. Not only had Bettis not won a Super Bowl, he'd never even played at a Super Bowl. So, and he'd been in what, one, two championship games? Yeah, he'd been in two championship games. So,
3 because the Broncos, two against the Patriots and 1 against the Broncos.
yeah, it was three then. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
was thinking it was three, and then it was because I'm forgetting about the other Patriots. Yeah, in 2001.
Oh yeah,
So
let's not forget that one.
yeah, yeah. So, like I said, it just seems like after 2004, it just seemed like, man, maybe the Steelers just aren't ever going to be able to win and get over the hump. Before the season, not a lot of experts, even though, like I said, maybe they thought that 2004 season was a fluke. So the Steelers are kind of like an afterthought. Like people are thinking the Colts, the Patriots, that's your Super Bowl favorites. Not Steelers, not so much. So to start the season, the Steelers start 2005 off by playing the Tennessee Titans, who were coached by Jeff Fisher at the time. Uh, Deuce Staley and Jerome Bettis are both out hurt, which is not surprising knowing Deuce Staley, but Bettis is a little bit of surprise. It's no problem because the Steelers just have this guy sitting on the bench named Willie Parker. Wow, what a nice luxury to have. You just have like your third string running back, and he goes absolutely off for 161 yards and a touchdown. And the Steelers coast to an easy win, 34-7. I think too, like Jeff Fisher says to Bill Cowher, boy, this guy's really gonna be something. So they're really like, Willie Parker and obviously the defense, because I think McNair still played for Tennessee at that time. So they really shut down them.
And
And
they had a terrible history against the Titans, and especially against McNair. Like they had been beaten by them so many times in previous
yeah,
years. So that was a great way to start the season. And I was at that game, and I remember the guy who sits next to me, who normally sat next to me at the games. About the third quarter, he ran down to like the Heinz Field gift shop, and he bought a Willie Parker jersey to put on for the rest of
they
the
had
game.
one. I'm surprised they had one in the
I
gift shop. Like
I
the
I
third string
was
running back, they're selling his
I
jersey.
know. I know. I was surprised too. And he comes back with his Willie Parker jersey and he's all proud of himself. And I remember we're all giving him a hard time, like, dude, that's the third string running back. He's when Bettis and Steele are healthy, you're never gonna see him again. And you just wasted, $60 or whatever it costs. And
Oh,
sure
especially
enough,
at the gift shop, everything's like 20 to 30
oh
dollars
yeah.
more expensive.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, they probably put like a sticker on it because he was already having a good game
Yeah,
at that
it's like
point.
he's up to 100 yards. Okay, price went up another $10. Yeah.
And yeah, but sure enough, that guy had the last laugh because Willie Parker ends up being the third leading rusher. I mean, if you look at the all-time leading rushers in Steeler history, it's Franco, Bettis, Willie Parker.
Yeah, boy, what a fun. And people say, "Oh, well, how'd they find him?" How did they not find him? He played in Three Rivers Stadium against the
Yeah,
infamous Pitt game, like him and Jeff Reed. Like I'm convinced, like sometimes the Steelers like scout, like when college teams come to play Pitt, it's like, hey, let's check this game out. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. Like he had the out of like Willie Parker didn't have very many good games in college. That was one of them. I think he had 200 yards rushing or at least 180 that game.
yeah. You and I
So
went to that. You and I went to that game together. It was the 2000 season. It was the year that Pitt had to play at Three River Stadium because they had torn down Pitt Stadium, but they hadn't built
yeah,
Heinz
Bill
Field
Hutch.
yet. And it was like a weird time. It was like a Saturday like evening game. It was just an odd like time.
Ronald
And
Curry was the quarterback for
yeah,
North Carolina. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's this guy, this small running back, is just tearing Pitt up, and he wasn't even like really their starter. He was
No,
kind of like in and out of the lineup for them, and he'd gotten benched, and then that's the last you ever hear of that guy until he ends up on the Steelers 5 years later. And I remember even thinking, okay, he had a good game, and like he was that fast Willie Parker. He was so fast, and he could break these long runs. But like if you think about the prototype running back at the time, I mean, that year Sean Alexander's the league MVP. Who else was good? Ricky Williams, Jamal Lewis. Like
yeah,
like
the
the
bigger, yeah.
yeah, little tiny running backs were not. He wasn't tiny, but he was. You know, that's more of like your third down back, right? That's a guy maybe you throw to on third down. That's not your first and second down workhorse, and he ends up being really really good.
Yeah. So on the back of that, the Steelers come back and they go to Houston. And I think still in my mind, I still had a little bit of that. I wanted to see like what Ben was, if Ben was for real or if he was just a one season fluke. And I remember this is the game where I made up my mind. I said, Ben's for real. Ben's a real good. And you wonder, well, why in a blowout, 27-7? I remember like, well, the summer the Steelers defense played well. They had 8 sacks on David Carr, not to be confused with Derek Carr. And Willie Parker had another 100-yard rushing game and a touchdown. The Steelers win 27-7. According to a fact I found on the internet, the game took place on a hot and humid day. So the Texans left the roof of Reliance Stadium open in hopes that the Steelers would be hampered because they made them wear their black jersey. However, it was backfire because the Steelers won big, and all that made to do was Houston fans had to sit and sweat in the hot sun. Yeah, since they couldn't run the air conditioning with the roof open. Um, and another great thing was Ben, I remember threw a pass. I think it was to Cedric Wilson, like on his own 20, and he threw it to the Houston 20, but it was on the other side of the field. It was like a 70, 80-yard pass. If you think that's like an insane pass to let like throw it that long and like across the field too. It was, and he didn't even set his feet. It was an unbelievable throw. I just remember thinking that guy has like one of the best arms I've ever seen. So, anywho, that's the basically their preseason right there. They go 2-0 because neither of those teams ended up being very good. I didn't look up what Houston or Tennessee's record was. I think Houston had like 3 or 4 wins. They weren't very good. But now a real team comes to town, and that would be the nemesis of all nemesis, the New England Patriots. And I don't, yeah, it's kind of weird they played them in Pittsburgh 2 years in a row early in the season, but that's why that they had beat them the year before on that infamous Halloween game. But they give up the Steelers. They played well in this game, and they take a lead in the half, but they give up 16 points in the second half. And Ben does rally the team, and they tie the game with 20 with 1 minute and 27 left. But unfortunately, that's more than enough time for Tom Brady, and he drives the Patriots into field goal range, where Adam Vinatieri kicks a 43-yard field goal with 1 second left to win the game for New England. I remember Bill Cowher like not icing Adam Vinatieri. Like he tried to kind of mess with his head, like, "Oh, I'm gonna ice you. I'm gonna ice you. Oh, I'm not gonna ice you." And like it, like it's Adam Vinatieri. Probably like a regular season game, even in Heinz Field, really isn't gonna like mess with his head that much since he kicked like field goals and like Super Bowls and such by that point of his career.
Yeah, you're not going to ice Adam Vinatieri. What I remember most about that game is that when the Steelers were winning 10-7, and again, this is New England. Like you can't make mistakes, right? You have to you can't do anything dumb against that Patriots team. And Antoine Randall caught a pass like inside the 20-yard line. It was going to be a first down inside the 20, and they already had the lead. And he like inexplicably tries to lateral the ball back to Hines Ward, who was behind him. So like he's getting tackled and he tries to lateral it, and Hines Ward is not even looking for the ball because when do you lateral the? I mean, unless it's like the last, one of those like, no seconds on the clock and you're just trying to pitch it backwards. Like that's what he did at the 15-yard line when they were in the lead, and it's a fumble and New England recovers. And I just remember that was the turning point of the game.
Yeah, and New England was really good still. I mean, they weren't as good maybe as the year before, but they were still pretty good. And
Yeah,
you
I mean,
just can't you can't give like Tom Brady, you can't let them off the hook. You have to at least kick a field goal there at bare minimum.
exactly. And yeah, I mean they had won 3 of the last 4 Super Bowls. I mean they're just. And do you remember what else happened that game, Steve? That was the game where one of their players got hurt and
Oh,
Belichick.
that was the infamous "get away from my player"
Yeah.
game.
Yes.
Yeah, because like that was always like you'll see it even in games today. Like if like a guy, like not if a guy's just kind of gimpy, but if like he's down on the field, like out for the count, like just for pure safety's reason, what if somebody's not breathing or something? You have to give that person medical attention. And Belichick, obviously, like now knowing what I know about Belichick, it's pretty obvious that like if his trainers did that, he's obviously spying on your players to know the injury. So, the way Belichick said, "Get away from my player," because he thought the Steelers were going to spy on him. No, Bill, that's what you do. So, and he would get away with it because, like, was that the same year? Like, no, because they had traded Portis, but there was a couple seasons before that, like Mike Shanahan, like Portis got hurt in the first half, and he was like, "Oh yeah, he'll be back," which was a total lie. And the league fined him $1 million. And then Belichick would do stuff like that, and like, oh, nothing was done about it. He'd get away with it.
The if you really want to get into conspiracy theories, there's people that have said that like the guy that got hurt was wearing some kind of device or something, and that's why Belichick wanted everybody to get away from him because they didn't want to get found out. This was before they got caught with Spygate. I think that's probably a bit of a stretch, but I mean
I
it was
think he
just
just didn't
bizarre.
want him. He likes to hide injuries, and
Yeah,
he didn't want, like, he thought somehow like well, that's great, Bill. Are you going to accept the liability when somebody dies? That's
I,
great.
I,
Okay. Well, now you're liable, and I hope you get sued for, like, what if that guy can't walk or something, or die, God forbid, like, as a serious injury, and you delayed medical help? I'm pretty sure you can get in trouble for that in the civil court somewhere. I mean, I only got to convince like 8 out of 10 people. I don't got to get a unanimous vote on that one. So good
yeah,
luck, Bill. And you could be held personally liable, not just, you wouldn't sue the New England Patriots. You could sue Bill Belichick personally.
you could
So
just see Belichick answering your question or answering that statement being like, casualties happen, Steve. It's more important that we win the game and they don't find out about our trainers or injury procedures. I mean, yeah, that was just classic Belichick. And so, yeah, that was that game.
because I remember thinking, I forgot about that too. You mentioned it, but I remember thinking that when he said it, it's like, well, now you're going to be personally liable for that person if you're going to, withhold medical care. So, okay. I mean, good luck with that, Bill. I, so be that as it may, the Steelers lose their first game. So they're 2-1 at this point. And they have to go to visit the San Diego. It's so weird. The San Diego Chargers, not the LA Chargers, the San Diego Chargers. In the good old days, kids, before Spanos went crazy and decided that he really wanted to somehow share a stadium with the Rams, he used to have a team in San Diego, and they had pretty decent fans and a nice little following, but that wasn't enough for, who owns that? Yeah, Dean Spanos or whoever owns that team now. Or anywho, they go to San Diego, and they have a tough game because the Chargers are rebuilding and they're actually getting better. Um, James Harrison had a big interception. He jumped over a Charger player during the return, and it set up a classic Jerome Bettis like 1 yard touchdown. Jerome Bettis was still kind of in that mode where, like, they'd run the ball all the way down the field, and Bettis would get like his 1 yard touchdown. San Diego had Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson on offense. So yeah, that's pretty good. Uh, he had 218 yards passing and a touchdown, but he did throw an interception. And they held Tomlinson to 62 yards on 18 carries. That's really tough to do because Tomlinson was really, really good, especially Drew Brees. I mean, hmm. uh, it, so the big thing that comes out of this game is Ben Roethlisberger hurt his knee, and it's kind of one of those plays that definitely it ended up becoming a penalty later on, but back then, because it was like, wasn't Tom Brady, it wasn't a penalty. So he like kind of like Luis Castillo gets blocked and he falls down and he hits Ben's knee, and it's just kind of a fluke thing. It happens all the time, but Ben's able to kind of pull his knee out and he doesn't totally destroy his knee. Like, this would definitely come into play later in the season. And we'll probably end up covering this in this part 3 of our podcast series on this. But the Ben injury, it happens at the end of the game. It lead like these type of injuries were never a problem because, it didn't happen to Tom Brady, so no one cares. The game came down to a last minute drive, and I guess Charlie Batch comes in and just hands off the ball 3 times, and they kick a field goal, and they end up pulling out a win where Ben got kind of nicked up. But it was a good win against a pretty good Chargers team. I don't think the Chargers made the playoffs that year, but I think they had like 7 or 8 wins. So I think Breeze ended up getting hurt.
Yeah, was that a Monday Night Football game?
Sunday or a Monday night. I
Okay.
can't remember which, but it
And
was definitely one of those. Yeah.
but I remember it was like bittersweet because like you weren't sure, like, oh, is Ben out for the season? Like, what happened? And
Yeah.
fortunately, he wasn't, like you said.
Well, he just kind of I think he was able to move his leg just enough to where if it would have got caught in the turf, it could have been a lot more serious, and it would have been, well, that would have been the end of the season. I don't see the backup quarterbacks leading us to, a Super Bowl this year.
No.
So this is another curious game. Like they play Jacksonville, and this is at home in Heinz Field. The San Diego game was on the road, so you kind of understand. It's a tough. Even though it's probably a lot of Steeler fans, it was, you're still on the road. So the Jacksonville Jaguars come to town and Ben is hurt. So for some reason, Tommy Maddox fills in and he has a really bad game. Now, Jacksonville did go 12-4 this year and made the playoffs. So maybe like at this time, you still kind of thought Jacksonville wasn't that good, but maybe the loss in hindsight isn't as bad as it seems. Byron Leftwich was the quarterback for Jacksonville that year. He actually Brian threw an interception like right before the half that kind of kept the game close. I can't remember if it kept the Steelers in the lead, but Brian McFadden, who now has kind of moved into a starting role, like as a halfway through the season, they've kind of moved Townsend to more of a nickelback, like a extra corner, that third corner. He has a nice interception. And another thing is like why doesn't Charlie Batch play in this game? Like I know I asked you about this, and we neither of us can figure out why Charlie Batch didn't play this game.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can think of is Maddox was the start. I don't remember what the depth chart looks like. And Maddox was the starter in 2004 and got hurt. And then Ben came in and usurped the job. So you would think that Maddox would still be the second stringer. But then why did Charlie Batch come in at the end of the Chargers game? I don't know. I mean, they were both veterans. They were both capable of starting a game. I don't know. Cowher went with Maddox and figured that he was the best choice, and it came back to haunt him.
Yeah, because Max has a really bad game. He throws 3 interceptions, and probably the most costly one is the one in overtime where the defensive player for Jacksonville returns it for a touchdown, and that was the end of the game in overtime. That was back in the good old days of overtime when sudden death first score wins.
Yeah, although that would have ended even today. That would have ended pick
Yeah,
six
I
would have
guess
ended the game
yeah,
today. Yeah.
yeah, no matter what. But
Well, and do you remember they had two chances in overtime? They got the kickoff. They won the coin toss. They got the kickoff, and Quincy Morgan, who like never really did anything as a kick returner, um, ran the kick all the way back to like the Jacksonville 25.
I think is that where he just dropped the ball for no reason?
Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah, that was even worse. Yeah.
yeah, Maddox drops back to pass and he fumbles. Like nobody hit him. He just fumbled, and then like he tried to pick it up instead of falling out. He tried to pick it up, and Jacksonville recovered. So they blew their chance. Like they were going to kick a game-winning field goal, and he fumbles that away. But then the defense holds Jacksonville, and now they're going to have another chance. And I think when he threw that interception, I mean, it was close to midfield. Like they were not that far away from another field goal attempt. So yeah, that was bad, and that was well. He'll talk more about what happened to Tommy Maddox after that.
Yeah, so that's the third interception. I forgot about that fumble. Yeah, it's good call by you. But yeah, it was a really bad performance. And I guess, people were really mad because they saw the season like, that's our second loss. So people are against the team that I think people really thought we should have just mauled. But Jacksonville, like I said, I think the perception Jacksonville was thought that they weren't going to be that good that year, but they ended up surprising some people and being good. So they turn on Tommy Maddox after this game. We talked about this in the Maddox podcast too, his season. I think somebody threw garbage on his lawn, and a lot of just bad stuff was said about him by the fans and stuff. And he had a bad game, and it happens. And it was a really bad game, though, and he did really cost them the game. And but he seems like a really nice person, and was just kind of ashamed to see his like career kind of go down that route. So
Yeah, and he could be really great when he was great, but then when he got into like interception mode, I mean, oof. And that's what happened. He was like a turnover machine, and then yeah, to throw a pick six. I mean, it was bad. That was one of the most like sickening ways to lose a football game. And
well,
and
I yeah.
they were chasing Cincinnati. I mean, you're going to talk about that next, but they needed to win games. And
Yeah.
like you said, that's a game they should have won, and they didn't.
Yeah, so it like it's an AFC. See, this is what kind of comes out to bite them too, is this game's in the AFC. Like if you don't lose games in the AFC, it hurts. Like if you lose the NFC games, it really doesn't hurt you. Like you don't ever want to lose, but if you're going to lose, you want to lose to an NFC team because it doesn't hurt as much as this game does.
Right.
So they move on from that and they come back and they play in Cincinnati. So this is in Cincinnati early in the season. Willie Parker has a great game. He rushes for 131 yards and a TD. Ben only has 93 yards passing, but he has 2 touchdowns. And the defense really plays well. They intercept Carson Palmer twice. But even with the win, the Bengals still have the lead in the division at 5-2, and the Steelers are at 4-2 because the Steelers, I guess, have had their bye week already. And you hold the Bengals to 13 points with, I mean, the Bengals ended up having a really good offense that year. So,
It,
I
it
mean,
was it was so bizarre to be casing Cincinnati because they had stunk for so many years. And for them to be 5-1 going into that game was just unheard of. And then when we beat them and beat them soundly, I remember kind of thinking, okay, they're frauds. This is a fluke. Now they're just going to turn into the same old Bengals. And of course, that's not what happened.
yeah. Yeah, so that's a big win actually because it's in the division, it's in the conference, and you can't lose those games. Um, so next up is the Ravens, and your Ravens are always a tough game, and the Steelers win 20-19. It's kind of like I don't know, like people want to playing down, but it's the Ravens, and the Ravens games always seem like you rarely blow out the Raven. Like the Ravens rarely blow out the Steelers, and the Steelers, it's like those games are very rarely blowouts. But the Ravens did not have Ed Reed or Ray Lewis playing that game. The Ravens quarterback was Anthony Wright, who has an absolutely horrible game with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Ben did have 2 touchdowns and an interception with 177 yards. It's probably the classic: a win is a win. The Steelers are now 5-2, but like you said, the Bengals keep winning, so that kind of puts them at odds. Another big moment is I don't know if Ben's knee was still hurt from the Charger game or got hurt worse over the next 2 games, but his knee's in really bad shape, so they have him sit out the next 2 games. So the next game they go to Green Bay, where they don't win a terrible lot against Green Bay in particular and in Lambeau in general. But they win this one. They beat the Steelers 20-10. I guess Bill Cowher by that point had seen enough of Connie Maddox, so he puts in Charlie Batch. And Charlie Batch starts this game, and the highlight really of the game is a fumble returned by Troy Polamalu. He hits like Brett Favre, and Brett Favre fumbles, and then he picks it up. And I forget, was it Chris Hope or one of the other defensive backs helps block down the field. Charlie Batch has a whopping 65 yards passing. The team is bailed out by a strong defensive performance. It's a rare Deuce Staley sighting. It's much like Haley's Comet, it's every once in a lifetime you see Deuce, go crazy. He rushes for 76 yards and a touchdown. Another great thing about the offense that day is they don't convert a third down the entire game. They go 0 for 8. But somehow the Steelers win and they win by like 2 possessions, a much larger, win margin than the Baltimore game. So I'm not quite sure. Like that's kind of one of those weird games where they just kind of just win, but it wasn't a convincing win. But I guess when you got your third string quarterback in, you'll take them any way you can get them.
Yeah, and the Packers still had Brett Favre. They were still a contending team, so that was a good win.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Packers had a pretty bad year that year, but still, I mean, it's in Lambeau, and like I said, they don't. For some reason, the Steelers just don't seem to do well against like those traditional NFC teams. I don't know if it's like they all of a sudden like they'll nobody's around from those years when the Steelers stunk. It's like flashbacks to like the '60s. Like, oh my gosh, we got to lose to the Giants and the Packers and the Eagles. You know. Anywho, the Browns come to Pittsburgh, and Charlie Batch starts this game, and but he breaks his hand in the first half. But before breaking his hand, Batch does rush for a touchdown in the third quarter. Veron Haynes and Jerome Bettis have rushing touchdowns. The Browns quarterback and Steeler, Steeler hater Trent Dilfer has a really bad. Trent Dilfer has a really bad game. He goes 17 for 34 for 253 yards with a touchdown and interception. So he's under 50% passing and only threw one touchdown. Really, the play of this game, and it'll be one they show later in the season, is they run this really cool play where they hand the ball off to Antoine Rendoel and he throws a pass to Hines Ward for a touchdown. What a great trick play! Do you think we'll see that one again, Tim? Maybe sometime. And
I,
I
yeah, I mean, right, spoilers that we all know, right? But when I saw that play later, I'm not kidding. My first thought was that's the play from the Browns game, because it was it was such a cool play, totally caught Cleveland off guard, and it's amazing that they not only ran it again later in the season, but ran it again and became one of the greatest plays in Steelers history.
Yeah, and I think too, because like you gotta remember the Steelers offense was very much a run first offense. This whole season it was, run and run and run, and then you throw in some Ben Roethlisberger, and he's either gonna go play action or like do the classic Ben, I'm gonna run around and throw a pass for a big play. So that was kind of their offense that year. And the defense was still really good. They could stop, I mean, there was just still no running the ball against them. And then, but passing, they gotten at least to like where they were respectable. They weren't maybe the greatest pass defense in the league, but if you have that good of a run defense with like a solid pass defense, they can, you can really do some damage.
Hines Ward also becomes the Steelers' all-time reception leader in this game.
Nice.
So that's a footnote there for that one.
Good old Hines. Yeah. So the next three games are kind of the low point of the season. And I would call it like the second act of a play. I don't know, like if you write a 3-act play, normally the first one you introduce the characters, you get to know everybody, and then the second act is you put those characters in the worst possible situation that they could be in. So now you care about these people. Now they're really bad, and the third act is the conclusion. The conclusion to that conflict that you've created. George Lucas described The Empire Strikes Back as his second act of his trilogy, and that explains the direction he took with this movie. That's kind of where I got that from, was an interview with George Lucas, and that may be the last time George Lucas has got much of anything right. He knew what he was doing with that story, I guess. So
yeah, and then like you said, these three games are definitely comparable too.
The Empire Strikes Back, yes.
Luke getting his hand cut off and everything else that happens in that movie. Yeah.
So Ben's now frozen in carbonite on his way to Jabba the Hutt. And,
right.
Ben was out for a couple of games. He did come back for the Colt. Well, he was out for the Green Bay game already, so I guess he's already been frozen in carbonite. Charlie Batch broke his hand, so somebody cut off poor Charlie Batch's hand. So. I guess that's enough with the Star Wars analogies. It gets weird. Like, this is just such a weird loss. It's just like, I just talk it up to like, you're playing the Ravens and it's a rivalry game and it's never going to be easy. So this is Steelers 13, Ravens 16. Tommy Maddox has a rough day. He goes 19 for 36 for 230 yards, but he throws a touchdown and interception. And the interception is a weird one. Like, the Ravens defense really sacks him 6 times. They can't pass protect, and the Ravens now are good enough to shut down the Steelers running game. So I think like that's what kind of happened to the Steelers offense in this game. Is like they're a running team, and then when they don't have like Ben to like kind of like make that X factor where, okay, you stop the run and you kind of stop the traditional passing game. Now we got this guy that runs around that is going to break it down. It really becomes easier to stop the Steelers. And the game really is decided late in the overtime. Like, they throw this pass and it's not a bad pass. It's like, I think it was supposed to be like one of those like back shoulder, like where like Hines Ward's just supposed to stop and the ball's there. Well, the ball isn't thrown that badly. Just Hines Ward gets like falls to the ground or something, and like the ball hits his foot and he kicks the ball up into the air, and when he does that, the Ravens defensive back catches it. I mean, it's just kind of the totally flukiest thing. Matt Stover kicks the game-winning field goal in overtime. It was definitely just a fluky loss. Really wasn't Maddox's fault, but unfortunately for them, it's what their third loss of the season, I think. So they're kind of and it's an like I said, it's a division loss, it's a conference loss. The Steelers are like starting to kind of get into dangerous territory here because everybody else is winning. Like the Bengals keep winning, so they're definitely in trouble. I think Kyle Bowler was the was the quarterback for the Ravens. So
Yeah, the Ravens weren't very good at that time. They were kind of in between eras, so to speak, for them.
I think Billick was still the coach.
Billick
So
was still the
yeah.
coach. Yeah, and they had a really good year. The year after that, they went out and signed Steve McNair, and I think that was the year they might have went like 14-2. But in 2005, they stunk. And like you said, that was such a fluky. Like Heinz were kicking the ball straight up into the air. Such a fluky way to lose that game. So
Yeah, so they go to the Colts, and I think they kind of like the Steelers kind of got into panic mode. Like they're seeing the losses pile up, and they got two pretty tough games in a row coming up. So I think they rushed Ben back. They're like, okay, we need Ben. Like I don't know if Charlie Batch's hand was still broken and maybe he couldn't play. And they're like, we can't survive with Tommy Maddox at this point. So this is that blowout game that we'll talk about later a little more. Oh, we'll talk about it now too. The Colts blow out the Steelers, but it's not as big of a blowout as I think everybody thought. At least that's what I thought at the time. Uh, what's the Ike Taylor gets caught looking in the black field, but it's not like one of those ones where you like he just like this guy just runs right past him and he can't keep up. He like bit on a play action fake. Edgerrin James had 124 yards rushing. Marvell Smith hurts his ankle, which is a big thing because they couldn't block Dwight Freeney, who was a really good pass rusher. And Ben has a shaky game. I mean, combined with him coming back from an injury, he throws one touchdown and two interceptions. He only has 133 yards passing. But I just never thought that like the Steelers like couldn't play with the Colts. I thought, oh my goodness, this team is so much edge. I was like, I don't think the Colts are that much better than the Steelers. I think they just jumped on them early. And if the Steelers can, kind of hang with them, that they got a chance to play their game, they'd have a real chance of beating them. And I think I was in the minority on that one. I don't think a lot of people thought that after this game.
you were in the minority, and we'll talk more about that in the next episode. The Colts were so good that year.
Well, I think they were what, like 10-0 or 9. I don't know.
They were 13-0 at one point.
Yeah.
And they were going to go down as one of the greatest teams in NFL history. That's how dominant they were. And you're right. The score was not indicative of. The score is 26-7, and it sounds like a blowout, but they kind of could hang with them a little bit. But I just thought, man, if they have to play them in the playoffs, like let's just hope there's an upset and they wouldn't have to play them in the playoffs. Although at this point, with losses stacking up, you're worried about making the playoffs.
Yeah. So now what are they? 7-4,
Right.
and they're really falling behind. It's another conference like loss, which is really hurts. And they've already lost what one game in the division. So they're in trouble. They're going into a game against the Bengals in Heinz Field. And it's like what or like what do you got to do? You got to beat the Bengals. And like you said, you thought the Bengals were kind of frauds, but in this game, the Bengals have found themselves. Now, the Bengals midway have kind of their own little weird year. Is like their defense really starts to fade halfway through the season, and that's what kind of happens to the Bengals. So this game becomes a shootout. And Carson Palmer has a great game. He has 227 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Now, Ben has a pretty good game too, passing yardage wise, and he does throw 3 touchdowns, but he also throws 3 interceptions. And this is a shootout game, and that's not really like I said, that's not really the Steelers' style. They're a run it, pound the ball, play defense kind of team. And this was like, pass the ball over the field, 30, give up 38 points. That's not the most. I think, was that the most they given up all season? If that wasn't the most, that had to be one of the highest totals they given up the whole year. So since he wins, and it's a devastating loss. And now they've lost what, 3 games in a row. They're 2 games back of the Bengals. They have basically no chance of winning the division. The Bengals celebrate like they won the Super Bowl. If you watch like the highlights, like they're jumping around screaming "Who Dey, Who Dey," and like you can even see like Marvin Lewis is like trying to calm them down. Like dude, this is just, it's a big win, but it's only the regular season. We might have. But the Bengals are just, their emotions are too out of control. So much so that TJ Hushmanzada wipes his shoe off with the terrible towel, which apparently is a terrible idea because apparently anytime you do that, your quarterback gets his knee hurt. They just showed a clip of that before the Steeler game when they lost, and Joe Burrow got hurt the next week with a devastating knee injury. So don't even show that clip. You're taking your chances, Cincinnati. So
Yeah, I mean, I get they were excited because that
they
team
had
had just,
beaten, yeah.
they'd never done anything. They had been losers for so long, but they were so, and again, we'll get more into this when we talk about the playoffs. But they like thought they were like anointed. Like you okay, great, you won the division, congrats. You still have to go through a playoff field. You haven't won anything yet. And I always felt like they were so arrogant to think that they had won something.
Yeah, I think they looked at it as they had arrived to where it was more of just, this is a stepping stone along the way. This is, it's a nice, accomplishment, but it doesn't really, that's not your ultimate goal. Is your ultimate goal to win one game at Heinz Field and, big deal.
It's emblematic of their franchise. I mean, it just is. And you'd see more of garbage from them in years after this.
Well, even like I was watching interviews with someone like Carson Palmer and stuff, and like after he left, obviously years later, and he just said they just like they get too content with mediocrity sometimes. Like they want to sit around and wait for a draft pick to fall to them, or just not sign a free agent. Like they had a pretty good team this year, and they just couldn't sustain it. And even later years with Dalton, they have good seasons and good teams, but it's just like they never can quite like get the last couple pieces to get over the top. So
It's bad ownership. They're really the closest equivalent to the Pirates in the NFL. And you really can't, it's not quite the Pirates because you have a salary cap and you like have to compete. You can't just like
yeah.
not even try like the Pirates do. But it's equivalent. It's just terrible ownership. It's Paul Brown's son running the team, and it's just bad.
Yeah. So, that's enough with this part of the Cincinnati Bengals podcast. But it's a devastating loss because, like I said, they're 2 games back of the Bengals. They have no chance of winning the division. In the conference, the tiebreakers are adding up because it's another conference loss. So the loss basically puts the Steelers into must-win now territory. And they basically had to win out to guarantee a playoff start, which is what are 7-5. This is week 12, which is kind of early for that. Maybe you can get there week 15, week 14, but like even week 16, but to be at week 12 with you got to win now is kind of an odd position to be in. But that's where they were, and that's how good the other team's record were. Like I said, Jacksonville ended up with 12 wins. I think Cincinnati ends up with 11 wins. Like we said, the Colts had 13 wins. Denver ends up with 13 wins. Like it was a tough AFC field that year. So I think Kansas City had 10 wins and missed the playoffs.
Yeah, they
So
did. Yeah, Kansas City was was right on the outside looking in.
I
And
mean, to win 10 games and not the playoffs is not usual. It's
right,
not yeah.
right. Yeah, it was that tight of like there's some years where you could be 9-7, even some years where you 8-8 and you make the playoffs, but that year you had to win at least 10 games.
Yeah, even have a chance.
to
Yeah.
even have a chance. Yes.
Yeah. Well, kind of the recipient of that was the Patriots because they won 10 games because their division wasn't that good and they were able to kind of sneak in.
Right.
But so Cower, like I guess before that, and I don't know why you just wouldn't do this from the beginning, but I guess they still do this because I hear the players talk about it. I guess they kind of break the games down into 4 game season, like sets or sections. And I've heard Tunchi Oken talk about this, like the NFL season really does kind of change every 4 weeks. And if you think about that is true between the injuries and teams getting better or worse, there really is something to that. So I guess they would do 4 games at a time. Here's our next 4 opponents. Here's our last 4. Here's how we did. Here's where we're going. Kind of like set the direction of the season. Well, Cower throws all that out the window because there's no point in looking past anybody or ahead. Every week is basically a playoff game from here to the Super Bowl, which what was that? December? They're in December and they're basically, you're in the playoffs in December already. And I just remember like people like even on the radio, like who's the guy, Bubba. He was like, I think he has his own morning show now, but I think he was on B94. Like I think B94 was still a regular music station. And like I remember him even like giving like a pump up thing, like, no, no, everybody quit on this team. We can still win it. And yeah. And I was believing him, but I don't think a lot of people like at that point before that Bears game really thought like, and the Bears were a good team out of the NFC. I think that they made the playoffs at like 11 or 12 wins. So the Bears were a good team and they were coming into Heinz Field. And so the Steelers are win now, 1 game at a time. That's what they're going to do. They're just going to focus on the Bears, the heck with everybody else. So the Bears would make the playoffs. And this game really like kind of it sets the tone for the rest of the season. The Steelers, and you credit Jerome Bettis and what a team leader was. Not only does he say, "Hey, we got to win now," he kind of he not kind of he does he backs it up. He backs it up. And the Bears had a good defense, but Bettis had 101 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, and Willie Parker added in 68 yards rushing too. And you got to kind of describe the scene. It was a December game, and it was one of those snow games, like where as the game went on, it just kept snowing more and more and more. And I think by the end of the game, there was like 2 inches down on the field, and that was that. Now it's like iconic now that you think of it, but like I remember when it happened, getting pumped. Like Bettis is like what they're like first and goal with like the 5 or something, and Bettis gets a run and he hits Brian Urlacher and like another safety or something, and he just literally runs over 3 Chicago Bears to score a touchdown, and it's such like a quintessential Jerome Bettis run, and he just really, and Brian Urlacher was an All Pro, was pretty good.
Actually, he was the defensive player of the year in the NFL that year.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So it
yeah,
wasn't chopped liver exactly, yeah.
no, yeah, he was the best defensive player in football, and Bettis was certainly not in his prime anymore. And yeah, Bettis ran him over. That was iconic.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's like a veteran, like talking the talk and walking the walk there. And I mean, they just pounded the heck out of the Bears. I think the Bears were done, and which is weird. You would think, like being Chicago, you'd be used to playing in the snow, physical, but they just weren't ready for it. Well, those were the days when the Steelers would like run the ball and play physical offense. Wow, what a great thing. So next up is more NFC games. Is the Steelers play the Vikings, and the Vikings were very mediocre that year. What had happened? They had the Love Boat scandal,
Oh
which
yeah,
yeah,
forgot
like
about that.
Dante Culpepper and a bunch of other guys like rented a boat. I guess they went out and did some. Well, I mean, they're all consenting adults, so you can do whatever you want, I guess, but you're not supposed to do that in public. Although it is a boat, but I mean that's still public. It was a bad look for the Vikings. And Mike Tice, the coach, it just looked like he had no control over his team. And it happened during the season. I don't know if it was at I can't remember if it was the offseason. I think it happened during the season. I don't know. But anyway, so Culpepper was hurt, so they had to start Brad Johnson, who had actually won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay like what 3 or 4 years before that. But he had been with the Vikings before Tampa Bay, so this was like his second
Yeah,
or third
like in
stint.
1978, because he was so old at that point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When Fran Tarkington retired, they
Right, he was the
drafted. Yeah,
backup. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
We're exaggerating, obviously, but the Steelers dominate the Vikings, especially on defense. And it was weird because it was like a home game for the Steelers. Like there were a lot of Steeler fans had traveled to Minnesota, and it was weird. The Metrodome was full of them. 18 points isn't a lot, but when your defense holds a team to 3, that's pretty good. And this is kind of like another one game at a time, just play defense and run the ball mentality, which leads us to an AFC divisional opponent.
Hang on, if I can just interject, because one other thing that happened that weekend when they played Minnesota, you said they had to win out. They also had to get help because you said
yeah.
Kansas
Kansas City
City,
had to lose to somebody, I think.
right, because Kansas City finished with 10 wins, like you said. If they finished with 11 wins, they owned the tiebreaker because of what you've been saying about losing all these
Because
division
of
and
the
conference
conference,
games.
yeah.
And so Kansas City's playing the Giants that weekend, and Tiki Barber just absolutely shreds their defense. He has like 200, I don't know how many yards, 230 yards or something ridiculous. There's one play where like he runs towards the sidelines and they like think they have him tackled and they just kind of like let up and he just keeps running. And I was watching this game because I was in my fantasy playoffs. I had probably my best fantasy season ever. And the guy I was playing against had Tiki Barber. And I'm just getting so infuriated because they can't stop Tiki Barber, but it ends up being a huge game for the Steelers. It cost me my fantasy season, but it if Kansas City doesn't lose a game, even with the Steelers winning 4 in a row to end the season, they're still out. So that was actually a big game.
I think that would have been the first time an 11-5 team missed the playoffs, because I don't think an 11-5 team has ever lost the playoffs. It's happened once, if it's ever happened.
It may have happened back when there was only 2 wild cards. I think it was 88 or 89 when they added the third, or 90, I think, when they added the third wild card.
Hold on, I'm Googling as we speak. 11-5 team ever missed it comes up right on Google.
The Patriots missed.
Oh, there it is.
11-5.
Yes, the other.
But that was after this.
And the 85 the other was the 85 Denver Broncos, according to March 31st, 2020 article from ESPN.
Okay, and that was when there was only 2 wild cards. So that made a little more sense. But with 3 wild cards, usually 10 or 11 wins. Usually 11 wins is automatic with 3 wild cards. But here, if Tiki Barber doesn't run wild on the Chiefs defense, the Steelers actually would have been locked out of the playoffs with 11 wins.
That's crazy. Like, because I've never, like I said, 10 wins is pretty, like even 10 wins. Like I think Cleveland had a season where they had 10 wins too and missed the playoffs.
They did.
And I know New England did, but that was the Matt Castle. I think that was the Matt Castle year.
Yeah.
But like you lose conference, it depends on who you lose. Like if the Steelers reverse like the losses, like they win against Cincinnati and the other in Baltimore and lose to like the Vikings and the Bears, it's probably not as bad.
It would have been a whole different story at that point.
Yeah, it really is who you lose to. Especially division games are almost worth 2 games. They really are. Never mind like losing 2 division games, especially the team that's losing to any team, but especially the team that's on the top of the division. But be that as it may, I guess the Browns might find that out this year. But the Steelers play the Browns. Speaking of the Browns, they played them the next week. And the Browns were the Browns, and they stunk. And they were starting Charlie Fry, which I don't even know where Charlie Fry is or what fast food restaurant he's managing these days. But
was he even a real person? I mean, like, do we know that for sure?
Yeah. So the Steelers win this one in a squeaker, 41-0. There really isn't a highlight. I remember Willie Parker. Like I stopped watching after Willie Parker had like an 80-yard run. I remember really like it was just like they handed off and like it was a good run by Willie Parker, but it was like, okay, Cleveland's a complete joke. And the highlight of the game, of course, is James Harrison body slamming a Cleveland fan who had ran onto the field. So I guess in blowout time, like Cowher took out Porter and put in Harrison, which this team was so good, Tim. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm sorry. We'll put in our backup, James Harrison, who's
Yeah.
playing special teams because we can't get him on the field. And like, we'll play our third string running back, Willie Parker, because we have Jerome Bettis.
Yep.
And Veron Haynes is a really like, well, Veron Haynes was so different because he could catch the ball, and Bettis and Parker really weren't good at that.
Right.
So he really did play a different role in that offense. And it's just funny because like the Cleveland guy had the like, didn't he get banned for? Did he get banned for life, or I can't remember if he got banned for life or just 1 year. And he yeah, that guy, he had to apologize and like do some community service and still be a Cleveland Browns fan after all that. So my condolences to you. And he got body slammed by James Harrison. So
He should have apologized for even being at the game. That
well,
game,
he's the sucker. He paid money to get in the door, right?
that game was on Christmas Eve too, and it's like, man, why would you go watch that Cleveland team was so bad? So yeah, no wonder he had a lot to
probably had a
drink.
Charlie Fry jersey on. No, he didn't have a shirt on, I don't think. And like Christmas Eve in Cleveland, oh my gosh, you know how cold it is.
Yep.
But anywho, the Steelers win a game, and they're what now, 10-5. So the Lions come to town, and this was game like everybody was like, I think at this point everybody's kind of believing that the Steelers are going to make the playoffs. All they have to do is beat the Lions. So now, being the contrarian, I start to kind of get worried about the Lions because maybe it's just because I've been a Pitt fan for too long. This is the game that you lose because the Lions kind of stunk that year. I think they end up winning like 4 or 5 games, but they really weren't that good. So, and if the Steelers would have lost this game, they would have not made the playoffs because once again, they would have had the same record as Kansas City, and Kansas City would have made the playoffs. And the biggest thing I remember about this game was the first half made me so nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Steelers came out flat and they let Detroit take an early lead. And Ben overall had a bad game. He only threw for 135 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But once again, like Bettis and Parker kind of carried the offense. Parker had 135 rushing. Bettis had 41 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. It was a nice send off for Bettis. Actually, the quarterback was for Detroit was what's his name?
Joey Harrington.
Yeah. And he had a pretty good game that first
He
half.
did. He did. He at one point he converted like a 3rd and 20. And like you said, it was like, come on, like this was going to be such a great story. They were going to come back from 7-5 and squeak out a playoff berth, and like the Lions were up 14-7. And I don't think anyone would ever remember that part of this. Like everybody just remembers, oh, we won our last 4 games and it was great, but they were down 14-7.
Yeah, I
game.
remember being nervous in this game. Like, how can you lose? And like to even give up like 21 points to the freaking Lions. I mean, come on, they weren't that good. I mean, like the 21 points, that's the most they gave up since the Cleveland game, isn't it?
Well, think about
since the Cincinnati game, since the Bengals game, that's the most points they've given up. I mean,
and you talked about the previous 2 games were Minnesota and Cleveland. The defense gave up 3 points combined.
Yeah.
In both of those games, and now you're giving up 14 points in the first half to Joey Harrington. Like, yeah, at first quarter, that was the first quarter they gave up 14 points right off the bat. So yeah, that was frightening.
Yeah, it's obviously they were overlooking the Lions, and then they just kind of remembered they were the Steelers, and the Lions remembered that they were run by Matt Millen. And funny story, I read a quote by a Charlie Batch just not too long ago, and he thanked Matt Millen for cutting him in like 2002 or 3 or whatever. Matt Millen cut him because like he got to come to Pittsburgh, and obviously, you know, when have a much different career ending than he would have in Detroit. Yeah,
I would be happy about that too.
Yeah. The fans chant 1 more year late in the game. It's a really, Jerome Bettis mentioned in his post game. It's a really nice send off for Jerome. It's a great win. I mean, even though it made you and me, but you and me are like we're probably more nervous than most other fan. I think
Well,
just
well, and
we've
it was
suffered so much at the hands of Pitt football that we know that no lead is ever safe.
and it really wasn't. It was only again, it was only the beginning of the game. The Steelers did get it under control, and I want to say by like the third quarter, it was like
I
over.
think Randall had like a big kickoff, like punt return for
He
a
did when it
touchdown.
was when
Yeah.
it was 14-7. He returned a punt, and that kind of snapped the Steelers out of it, and then they rolled after that. So it was only like a momentary nervousness,
Glitch in the matrix. Yeah.
glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. uh, so the regular season is now ended. It is over, and the Steelers have somehow miraculously, with an 11-5 record, which other years would get you like a second and third seed, and maybe even a first round bye. They have clinched a sixth seed in the playoffs. They've had an up and down year, but they've ended the season on the up note. They won 4 games to end the season. William Parker had a pretty great season. He had 1,200 yards rushing. Um, I only have 4 touchdowns. I think he had more than 4 touchdowns. I don't have that written down. His yards per attempt were 4.7, which is pretty mediocre to decent. Like I have Sean Alexander's, who was, like you said, he like had a way more. He had like 1,800 yards and way better stats than Willie Parker had, but he had a little better year. Barry Sanders averaged 6.1 and Jim Brown 6.4 in 14 games. So like, that's like the top end, if you're looking at running back stats. But those are two of the guys are going to be Hall of Fame. And Willie Parker, probably, yeah, Willie Parker will never make the Hall of Fame, but he'll make the Steelers probably one, like their little Hall of Honor, right? I mean, I can't imagine, you know, Willie Parker wouldn't make their Hall of Honor.
Yeah. Again, he's top 3 all time in yardage. So
Yeah, I mean, if they have John Henry Johnson and some of those other guys, other guys, but Bettis for the year had a 368 yards, and he had 9 touchdowns. His yards per attempt were only 3.3, but I mean, he's coming in a lot of short yardage and like scoring like those 1 yard touchdowns. So that's really not going to help your yards per attempt. Ben has a pretty decent year for, I think, there is no sophomore slump, I would say. He has 2,385 yards passing. He has 17 touchdowns, but he throws 9 interceptions. I think that 3 interception game against Cincinnati was kind of, not his worst game, you know, and he had another game where he had 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. So not that great of a year for Ben, but pretty solid. I think I wouldn't call it a sophomore slump. And it's hard to compare these stats to today's, because even I mean, it's 2005, but like you said, teams were different the way they scored offense. There were much more plotting running game. It wasn't like the game breakers, like it seems to be more common. Heath Miller, our top draft pick, ends up having a great rookie season. He has 39 catches, 459 yards. He has 6 touchdowns receiving, and he really becomes the go-to guy while Ben looks for when he's in trouble. And that really would continue on for the rest of Heath Miller's career. Like whenever Ben's in trouble, he looked for a number 83. And probably one of the things like Ben misses most about that. Brian McFadden, another draft pick, has a big interception in the Jacksonville game, and he becomes a really solid player. He becomes the starter at corner halfway through the season. And like I said, that McFadden thing really has a nice trickle down effect, because now Deshae Townsend, who is still a decent corner, can now play like your third slot receiver. And that really I think, gave the Steelers an advantage. And that's just, and then you put Paul Mallo in the mix, and you got Hope, and Ike Taylor is playing, really good. It really helps the Steelers match up against the offenses of, I would say, like the Bengals and the Colts. It really gives them a nice options. So the first two draft picks contributing in a big way in the rookie season, that's, a little bit unusual, but it's, a welcome thing. Uh, Nationally, nobody's really paying attention to the Steelers. It's like, well, they snuck in, a six. I guess in general, a sixth seed in the playoffs really doesn't get any hype, unless they're from like New York or LA or something, or Dallas maybe. But like I said before, I think the Steeler, like I mean, I thought where the Steelers were on a roll, and I thought they had a good chance of making some noise in the playoffs. So that's where we're gonna break it off with the regular season. The next podcast in this series will be on only the Colts game. It's such a pivotal game in Steeler history, and we'll focus in on the Colts, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up the rest of the playoff wins in a separate podcast. But I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. This is like I said, one of my favorite Steelers seasons of all time. I can't wait to talk about the Colts and the playoffs games. I mean, this is like some iconic moments in Steeler history, at least for me, coming up.
Yeah, Steve, I agree. This is a fun one to reminisce about. And like I think I was feeling the same thing as you at the end of the regular season. Like I was so like it was so cool that we came back and made the playoffs when it was like after you lose 3 games in a row, you usually don't come back from that. 3 games in a row, like in November,
Yeah.
that's pretty like nail on the coffin typically. And they came back and made the playoffs. And then I was kind of like, I was like, well, on a roll, who knows? Anything could happen. But like you said, that's 6th seed. No team had ever made it to the Super Bowl as a 6th seed because you had to play 3 road games, and if the
Yeah.
seedings held, you had to play 3 division winners, and so that was just going to be a tough road. But then I also remember thinking, well, look how many times we had home field advantage and we
We
lost
blew it. Yeah. Yeah.
AFC
And that was
Championship
another thing
games.
I felt too. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'd love to do that to somebody else,
Yeah,
once here.
yeah. Well, because
Wondering.
Cowherd lost 4 AFC Championship games at home at that point. And so
Yeah.
it's like, well, maybe we need to be on the road. Who knows? I was optimistic. I still don't know that I was gonna like. I still don't know that I thought they could match up with the Colts, but definitely I was feeling optimistic, and it was turning into a pretty good season. And one last thought I had, you mentioned the 11-5 record. Isn't it funny that 10 years earlier when they made the Super Bowl, that's the same record they had that year
No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't.
when they
And they were
hosted.
and weren't they? Were they were the number 2 seed that year?
Right. They had a bye
Yeah,
week, and
and they.
because Kansas City got upset, they ended up hosting the AFC Championship game against the Colts. And of course,
It's amazing. One year, like I said, you're a second seed with a bye week, and you end up hosting a championship game. And then this year, you barely make the playoffs.
right,
Like you literally had to have Kansas City lose to make the
right.
playoffs.
You'd have, yeah, again, Tiki Barber's like the unsung hero of that season. And,
So the
and again,
Steelers MVP should have been Tiki Barber, not
and again, I probably
not Heath
remember that
Miller.
game.
Yeah.
I probably remember that game more than most people because it was just a crushing upset in my fantasy league. But yeah, I mean, that's where they were. Like it's just funny, right? 11-5, that 10 years earlier gets you a home AFC Championship game. 11-5, 10 years later, you're barely in. You're on the road the whole time. So funny how that shakes out.
Yeah. So definitely stay tuned for the rest of the trilogy. I think we're all going to enjoy the next 2 podcasts probably a little more than, well, no, why not? It's our win. Let's enjoy it. So all right, Tim, thanks for tuning in stay tuned for the other 2 parts of our series. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.